Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Now call the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to order. My name is Kelly Regan. I'm the MLA for Bedford Basin, and I'm the chair of this committee. I'm going to remind everyone to place your phones on silent, and I'll ask our committee members to introduce themselves, and I'll begin with Ms. Coombs, who is participating virtually. Ms. Coombs.
Good morning, everybody. Kendra Coombs, the MLA for Cape Breton Centre, Whitney Pier.
Thank you. Mr. Young.
Good morning, everyone. Nolan Young, MLA for Shelburne.
Mr. Taggart.
Good morning and welcome. Tom Taggart, MLA for Colchester North.
Ms. Barkhouse.
Good morning and welcome. Danielle Barkhouse, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Good morning. Good to see everyone. I'm Melissa Sheehy-Richard, the MLA for Hants West.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Good morning. Susan LeBlanc, the MLA for Dartmouth North.
Ms. Nicol.
Good morning. I'm Laura Lee Nicol, Cole Harbour, Dartmouth.
And Mr. Smith.
Good morning, folks. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kent Smith. I'm the MLA for the Eastern Shore.
I would note that officials from the Auditor General's Office, Legislative Council Office, Hansard and Legislative Committee's Office are in attendance as well. And I do believe that our Conflict of Interest Commissioner is here as well. On today's agenda, we have officials with us from the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing and the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency with respect to the Auditor General's report regarding the Metropolitan Regional Housing Authority examination of service contract awards. So I will ask the witnesses to introduce themselves. I'll begin on my left. I know that's sort of not the normal, but we've got a cast of thousands here today. So, Mr. Ward.
Yeah, Brian Ward, Executive Director of Operations, Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency.
Ms. Menchenton.
Pamela Menchenton. I'm the Executive Director of Client Services for the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency.
Deputy LaFleche.
LaFleche. I'm the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Seniors and Long-Term Care.
Ms. Elliott-Lopez.
Good morning, Vicki Elliott-Lopez. I'm the Senior Executive Director with Housing.
Mr. Jack.
My name is Gregory Jack. I'm Director of Finance at the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency.
And Ms. Spittal.
Cara Spittal, Director of Policy and Strategic Priorities at the Provincial Housing Agency.
Spittal. Got it. Thank you. So I would now invite Deputy LaFleche to make opening remarks.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us here today to speak about public housing, the Auditor General's findings, and the improvements we are making to the system. As you know, my name is Paul LaFleche, and I have the privilege of being the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, as well as Seniors and Long-Term Care. And I'm also the acting interim CEO of the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency, as well as the acting chair of the advisory board, or the interim chair of the advisory board, as designated by the Act. Before we begin, let me I don't have to introduce my members. The chair did it. Great job. I will want to note that Mark Peck, the acting or the interim CEO for 11 weeks, will not be here. He's got a little issue he has to deal with. He just drove back from BC, and he was invited but could not make it. I guess you'll have to make do with me, who has been interim CEO since Monday, and it's been a heavy load. Yesterday I spent the whole day in the operating room at the infirmary to have a leg operation, so I might get up and walk around. I also haven't taken any of those pills they told me to take for pain, so I figure I'm painful enough. So I'm going to just excuse myself from time to time. But we have a great team here who can address all your questions, and there's some team members in the back I'm not allowed to introduce, but I want to thank the Office of the Auditor General right off for their reports. And I say reports because there were two reports, one in June of 22 and one just released last week, and both are very important key reports that really guide us forward. I do want to mention also that we've been in constant communication with the Office of the Auditor General well before those reports were finalized, particularly in the first case, the June report. So we had an idea of what was coming down and what moves we needed to make, and you saw that culminate in a new agency which is now 56 days old on December 1st, which was proclaimed. This report, this last report, was not a complete surprise to us. We did have I had a heads up sometime in late summer that there were some issues that came out of the first report, which the Auditor General wanted to look at. And in discussions with the Auditor General, I made a decision that we would allow her to complete her report, which she completed and presented last week, before anything happened, and we can talk about that in the questions to come. Staff have been working very hard to bring consistency, accountability, and structure to an organization that has not had it for much of its existence, unfortunately. There are various reasons for that. One of the reasons is a significant change in leadership. And here I'll pass to Ms. Ledley. And do we have enough of those?
Should have 15.
Okay, I didn't see 15, or I gave them away to Brian Darrell. This is a housing leadership timeline, and it shows you all the changes that we've had over the years. Many deputy ministers, many ministers, including the chair of the committee. And I want to start by saying many of these people are my friends. I've worked with them. Some I still know, they're retired. They did the best they could. All the ministers did the best they could. But frankly, housing was not a priority for government until recently. Public housing I'm talking about. So it's been a very, very tough go. And I know many of these leaders we've had over the past were extremely frustrated they couldn't get things done, including probably the chair and my colleague deputies, some of whom are still deputies in different portfolios. I've been in a very, very privileged position to have a minister who's totally focused on public housing. I was actually quite surprised. This is his big thing, public housing. And he loves it. He has great ideas on it. He wants to get it done. And he's very pleased to have seen the Affordable Housing Commission report. He's very pleased to have seen the Auditor General's report in June. And he was extremely pleased to introduce a new bill creating a new corporation so that some of the things that you've seen happen and the Auditor General has reported on do not happen again. Now, you can never reduce risk to zero. You can only put in place appropriate mechanisms, and that's what we're doing. So the staff have been working very hard on that in the last time, and you might note that these staff here are all different than the staff which existed when I took over some 14 months ago. The chief operating officer is gone, the chief executive officer left, and the 2 executive directors left, the 5 district directors left. And I'm not saying these people left because we chased them out. Many of them left for different career opportunities. Some of them retired. But we've renewed the whole staff, that's the point. And we brought in people from different areas of government who I've worked, in some cases, worked with before, and in other cases were highly recommended, to pinch hit. There are some people who are only here for an interim time. Steve McIsaac came in and greatly pinch hitted to set up the corporation. That was a great service that he did for me, and he's off to other things now. We have a gentleman in the room I'm not allowed to introduce who's pinch hitting from seniors and long-term care, where he was executive director and worked for me in several places. He's driving to the northern region every week to really take care of directorship of that region, in which we've had a lot of problems. So many problems, in fact, that I've made several visits to one public housing building there. Steve McIsaac, when he was CEO, made several visits there to deal with things. And we even called in favors from the mayor of Cumberland County to make several visits there. So we're pulling at all the stops we can to bring in the right talent, to restructure the organization, and get it headed in the right direction. It's a new organization, only 56 days old, and you'll have to be patient. Things take time in government. The Premier says, get it done. I heard that last week, and we're going to get it done. But it does take time to do it right. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to questions. Ms. Chair, I don't have Mark's speech, unfortunately. I don't know if you were expecting one. Okay.
No, I wasn't.
I didn't think I could have brought one for him.
Yeah, okay. So the time is now 9:12. We do 20 minutes of questioning per caucus. So we will begin with the Liberal caucus and Ms. Nicol.
Good morning. I just wanted to know, Mr. LaFleche, I guess, and thank you for all being here, that the recommendation number 1 of the Auditor General was for the department to direct the Housing Authority to adhere to the Housing Authority conflict of interest policy. In the response to the report, it's mentioned that a new conflict of interest policy processes and guidelines have been developed. Can you further discuss this new policy and expand on that, and what's in it and how it will help prevent what happened in the past?
I'm going to allow Ms. Menchenton to do that, and I'm going to hand it in.
So you were expecting my question?
Yes. Did you send it in?
Mr. LaFleche, so just a reminder.
Yeah, Kim Ledley.
Mr. LaFleche, just a reminder, you have to be recognized to speak.
Oh,
okay?
sorry.
And sometimes we get out of practice. So, Mr. LaFleche.
Sorry, I'll pass it to Ms. Menchenton.
Ms. Menchenton.
Hi, thank you for
Menchenton?
the question. So we do, in fact, have a new conflict of interest policy. This is the one that Deputy just handed out. And pardon me, this involved with the policy is a mandated requirement for all staff to read and understand the policy. And we are also providing training to staff to help them understand what a conflict of interest is, real or perceived. And with that as well, we've introduced new standards and processes and systems really in place that are consistent from one end of the province to the other. Because one of the issues was that we always did have a policy in place, but it may not have been applied consistently. So we put some of those features in place for the new policy.
Ms. Nicol?
Thank you, Ms. Chair. And in that vein, so you're saying you found some flaws that existed in the past policy. I just wanted you to expand on that. But in the vein of consistency, there was once 5 housing authorities, but recently changes, the 56-day-old Crown Corporation in charge of housing. Does this mean that this new policy applies equally across the province?
Ms. Menchenton?
That will be the goal for a
Ms.
number of things.
Menchenton?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just a reminder, everyone, I know we all want to answer the questions, but for the sake of Hansard, I'm the traffic cop, so so please don't proceed until you get go, okay? And so, Ms. Menchenton.
Thank you. Yes, in fact, that's the goal with all of the policies and a lot of the work that we'd like to do going forward. Now that we're brought under one roof, we have an opportunity to layer one set of standards, one policy, one approach to everybody. So before, they operated very much in silos, very much independently, even though we had a policy, again, that governed everybody. The interpretation of that policy may have been different in every area, and adherence to that policy, the checks and balances around that policy may not have been in place. So that's something we're trying to now remedy with this new policy that we have.
Ms. Nicol?
And can you discuss the significance of security services specifically to public housing and what a security service contract entails?
What a security contract entails. Ms. Menchenton?
So we retain security services. Are you asking me what would they do? Much of it was around tenant issues. Sometimes tenants will ask us to add additional security for, cameras and things like this around our properties. There could be a variety of issues as to why we would have security in place, just to really about, monitoring tenant concerns.
Ms. Nicol?
So we know the Auditor General, through her and her office's thorough work, uncovered these conflict of interest issues at one of the previous 5 housing authorities. Will the department conduct an audit at the remaining 4 regional housing authorities, Cape Breton Island, Cobequid, Eastern Mainland, and Western Regional, to ensure the process for awaiting contracts follows the appropriate conflict of interest policies and procurement?
Yes. So we've already engaged an internal auditor and have already, we already have discussions underway about how we're going to approach that work. We want to do a deep dive into our operations and find out where there are opportunities to improve our services, to improve our operations, and where there may be gaps that we need to address. So yes, that process is already underway. We're taking this very seriously.
Ms. Nicol?
And I read from your response, that the gaps can be anywhere in the province, and you will address them in that regard when it comes to conflicts. So the training of staff to make sure they're aware of the conflict of interest policy under that same vein, to avoid this happening again in the future, seems like it would be a good step forward to take. But of course, there's always a risk of bad actors, and training is proven to be a preventative tool in conflict of interest issues. So what conflict of interest training is currently offered? And does the department plan to change conflict of interest training requirements for staff?
Ms. Menchenton?
So our Human Resources Department is rolling out that training across the province. So they'll be visiting each district office to talk to employees about how to recognize a conflict of interest, what their responsibilities are under our new policy, and what sort of examples might look like a conflict of interest in the context of the work that we do. So that's the type of training that we'll be rolling out. I don't have a copy of the training, but I can certainly talk to our HR department and get you copies of what that could look like.
Ms. Nicol?
And one thing I found concerning in the Auditor General's report was that the Housing Authority's conflict of interest policy doesn't require a conflict of interest declaration and to be documented. Has this been corrected now that the new policy is in place?
Ms. Menchenton?
It has. So there are forms, mandated forms that our employees have to fill out and submit to us for filing with our HR department. Those forms will require them to disclose conflict of interest, and we're revisiting that annually to ensure that we're keeping up to date on anything that changes within our employees' context.
Ms. Nicol?
Again, to the Auditor General's report, it notes that there was a failure to address the real, apparent, and perceived conflicts of interest, and how that undermines the public's confidence in regional housing. So what is the plan to restore that public confidence?
Ms. Menchenton?
Well, I'm concerned about that too, and so that's something that we're working on with respect to trying to be more transparent about the work that we're doing. We're building a website, a new website, because we do have a new organization. So right away, I can tell you that our appeals process is our new appeals process is on our website. We intend to build that a little bit more with more transparency. For our tenants, for example, we're hoping to have some information on our website eventually with some of the tech changes that we're making that will allow them to see where they're on the wait list, you know, their rent, their, all kinds of pieces of information that they ask us for all the time. So we're trying to be more transparent in all that we're doing. But with respect to conflict of interest, we're tightening up, we're trying to close some gaps, we're trying to really reduce, minimize the opportunity for anyone to work outside of the policies that we have in place.
Ms. Nicol?
So one of the issues that led to this conflict was that bidders were not required to declare conflicts of interest. Has the department corrected and addressed this in its tendering process?
Ms. Menchenton?
We have. So we've added language now to our tenders that require our bidders to disclose whether they do have a conflict in the context of the tender.
Ms. Nicol?
And one of the observations by the Auditor General was the director of the Metropolitan Housing Authority was receiving government subsidies related to personally owned properties. What is the policy surrounding this, and has any changes been taken place?
Ms. Menchenton?
Oh, I'm sorry. So we are requiring our employees to disclose whether or not that's the case. Not every rental property every employee that has a rental property is in conflict necessarily. So we will be looking at every case on an individual basis. I will go further to say that we have asked advice from the commissioner, the conflict commissioner, on whether or not going forward that needs to be something we need to consider as far as disallowing that in the future.
Mr. LaFleche?
Very good. Keep the handoff button. So I'd asked Ms. Elliott-Lopez to talk about the timeline when rental subsidies came in, and what they were like and how they were used, and what system we moved forward to. In apart from the Public Housing Corporation, there are rental subsidies out there that are portable and go everywhere. So maybe you want to hear a little bit about that, because that's also an issue.
Ms.
So,
Nicol,
go
would
ahead.
you like to hear about that, or it's up to you?
I believe it's in essence in response to the question that I asked, so yes, I would.
Ms. Elliott-Lopez?
Thank you for the question. So pre-2017, rent supplements were completely non-portable, and what that means is that they were tied to the landlord. And so checks would run directly from government to the landlord, and they would then screen individuals coming in. We don't offer any new non-portable rent supplements, and in fact, we have a few legacy ones left. Those are declining year over year, and starting in 2020, the only rent supplements we now offer are portable, and those are offered through the department. So, the housing authorities, the new public housing agency no longer oversees the rent supplement program. That's all overseen through the department, and they're all portable, which means they're attached to the individual, and they get to choose where they want to live.
Ms. Nicol?
Thank you for that question. That's good oversight. When it comes to, like you mentioned, this website and being accountable, will the audits be made public?
Ms. Menchenton?
Yes. We have no... on the website. On the website, yeah, well, I would anticipate that they would. We're still building it. It's still evolving. We still need to figure out, the things that we want to put on there. It's brand new, so that's to come.
Ms. Nicol, you have just under 10 minutes left.
Thank you. And so thank you for that, because the accountability is the big piece, and that will, to the point that I made earlier about building, the public confidence. So in the most recent fall House session, the government passed legislation for the amalgamation of 5 regional housing authorities into one Crown corporation that's 56 days old. Can you discuss the transition and organizational structure of this new organization? Because it's been the experience, everyone knows that when a reorganization happens, it causes delays and some things. So I just want to know more about how that's going to get up and running.
Mr. LaFleche?
We have an org chart, which Ms. Ledley can pass out. These are not props. We also have another one, which you might pass out, called Public Housing Assets, which shows you where all the assets are and where the districts are. What you will really love is that you can phone your director of your district for issues.
Great.
Mr. LaFleche, if there are any more handouts, maybe we can just get them all out there, because each time it sort of takes up some questioning time, so.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, I'll pass them out while you guys are going, okay?
Okay.
The rest are more informational.
Okay. So back to Ms. Nicol.
So you mentioned how many districts are there under? So again, trying to get an understanding of the governance and the reason for creating the Crown Corporation and how it's going to be more efficient. You're saying we'll have a direct line to the districts, but when it comes to the public confidence again, and that, I don't think people really realize how much, and if you're going to be growing public housing, like what that means. So how many districts are you referring to into this map?
Ms. Menchenton?
4.
Yes. So we have 4 districts. So we had previously 5. Eastern and Copperquid have now become Northern. And the reason that we did it that way is to try to balance out the number of public housing units in each of the districts. It was a little uneven before, so we're trying to bring some standardization to that, recognizing that every district, of course, is different. Obviously, the most people in public housing are in Metro, followed closely by Cape Breton, and then Western, and then the Northern region. So the reason that we made the government changes, first of all, it was a recommendation from the Auditor General as well as the previous Housing Commission to restructure and to bring a new governance model to public housing, which we've done. So we've also made, as Deputy alluded to earlier, some significant leadership changes in order to just have a different go forward than we've had. So we felt that changing the leadership was really important to do that. Brian and I are among those leadership changes, as well as a number of others. We have different district directors in each of those regions than were there before. I'll just start by saying that we have over 17,000 tenants. I mean, if we were a municipality, we would be the third largest in the province. So that's a lot of folks to take care of and to properly manage the units. We have over 11,220 units across Nova Scotia. So it's a significant challenge, and it was being dealt with in 5 different ways. And so that meant that a tenant in Yarmouth may have been treated differently than a tenant in Cape Breton. So we wanted to bring some uniformity and some consistency to the approaches that we were taking with respect to servicing our clients. So that was that was the number one goal in recreating a governance model. We have a new board structure. We have a staff committee now where we dissolved the previous Housing Authority boards. We now have a staff committee that reviews appeals, and I may ask Ms. Spittal in a moment to speak to that and describe what that looks like. And we also have as Deputy mentioned, he is the interim board chair for us as well. So we have a different governance model in place. Does that answer your question?
Ms. Nicol, would you like to hear about the governance now, or would you prefer to?
Yes, but we can go to Ms. Spittal to explain, but what I'm trying to get from my question is basically the Housing Commission, as you brought it up, the recommendation was to create a arm's length independent entity. So is the Crown Corporation the response to that recommendation, and why?
Ms. Menchenton?
Create a new governance model or Crown Corporation?
Ms. Nicol?
Well, we were guided by
Ms. Menchenton?
and again from the Auditor General's office, who made the same recommendation as the Housing Commission. So they were aligned on having reviewed all of our programs and services, they came to the conclusion that this was the way forward for public housing. Deputy had mentioned earlier as well that it's bounced around a little bit with different departments and different governance. We had 20 recommendations for changes in June. We're taking that very seriously. That's in fact going to be forming the backbone of our business plan and strategic plans going forward in trying to address some of those Auditor General changes. And we felt that we needed a new governance model in place. Again, new leadership, just a new way of doing things to bring some uniformity to all of the services that we're providing across the province.
Ms. Nicol.
And we're already seeing some early results.
Okay. The new Housing Corporation oversees public housing, including the public housing waitlists, which in September grew to 6,596 applicants, including 2,443 families. And so I just wondered, you mentioned how now there is 11,200 units across the province. Do we know what is needed? What more public housing is needed?
Ms. Menchenton?
Sorry, I didn't hear the very last bit. I apologize.
Ms. Nicol?
Thank you. What I've said, you know the data, and you said that how many units you have across the province in public housing. Do we know how many more are needed? Because to the Deputy Minister's comments, he said that, now we're in public housing. The Minister is very supportive of it. Do we know how many more units are needed?
Mr. LaFleche.
So that's a sort of a compound question, because we have 2 ways to take care of people whose income does not allow them to afford what is the average market rent. One way is public housing, and the other way is rental subsidies, which Ms. Elliott-Lopez spoke about. Right now, the breakdown is about 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 of our customers, our clients, are dealt with through public housing, and about 1/3 in rental subsidies. Now, that was a lot lower ratio 3 years ago, 2 years ago, even 1 year ago, because we've moved up. What is this? Yeah, we've moved up the number of rental subsidies significantly. It's now up to 6,300. So, and that's because you can't build new units quickly, nor does the private sector build quickly. So there aren't units out there that you can just find empty to put people in. So we've had to give rental subsidies, so the people who might be in units or have a unit but they can't afford it because the rent is too high for that unit, for what their income is. And there's a national guideline of 30%. Not our guideline, it's a national one. We just use it for convenience right now. One can argue whether it should be 28, 32.
Order. The time for the Liberal questioning has elapsed. We'll now move on to the NDP questioning. And Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thanks to everyone for being here. I just want to pick up on this. I have a lot of questions, but I want to pick up on a couple of things around the subsidies versus public housing, just to begin. Mr. LaFleche, yes or no? Answer really quick. Do you agree? Do you agree with me that there is a fundamental difference between subsidies and a public housing unit?
Mr. LaFleche.
Yes, they're a different tool.
Oh, I just need the one answer. Just
Yeah,
the
no,
one
no,
word.
they're a different
great,
tool
great.
for.
Yeah, great.
For different things.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Great. And I want to clarify something that Vicki Ms. Elliott-Lopez said, and that you said that now did you say that all the subsidies now are portable, or are there some that are grandparented in as ones that are tied to units?
Ms. Elliott-Lopez.
Yes, all new subsidies are portable, but we do have grandparented non-portable as well.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you. Just for the record, I want to say that my view of the policy difference between those two types of government help, I suppose, for residents is that in one way we have publicly owned and publicly funded with public money units, i.e. we're the landlords and provinces are landlords, and then we have ones where we are using public money in the private sector. So there's a big difference there, and I hope if Minister Lohr is so excited about public housing that in fact he wants to go towards the public money in public infrastructure. That's all I want to say about that. So getting back to the Auditor General's report, my first question, and again, recognizing that many of you, or most of you, or maybe all of you, were not in the department at the time, but one would hope that you prepared for this meeting and these questions, so I'm going to ask. In terms of the conflict of interest that the report focuses on, I'm wondering if someone can, and I guess I'll direct this to Deputy LaFleche, why wasn't the conflict addressed? And is there any thought as to why the people in the department think that the conflict was not disclosed to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner or to the Auditor General at the time?
Deputy LaFleche.
Okay, sure.
Ms. Menchenton.
But the conflict of interest was addressed. So we have a new policy in place now. We have new language in our tenders. I'm not sure if I understand that.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Thanks. So I mean at the time. So we know that the Auditor General did an audit on the department and all of the Housing Authority, and then from that audit, there came the second subsidiary audit. So the conflict was in place, or the conflicting situation was around for quite a while. So I'm talking about like when it was actually happening. Was there no one aware of the conflict? Was there no one able to speak out about the conflict? Why wasn't it addressed at the time? Why did it wait until there was a complaint to the Auditor General?
Ms. Menchenton.
So we became aware that they were looking into something, as Deputy mentioned, in the summer. We didn't know exactly what they were looking into or what their conclusions were. So as soon as we became aware of the issue and the results, certainly, of the Auditor General, the final report, we did act and had begun to act prior to then by looking at our policies and what we needed to do to fill in gaps that were existing. So, and the director was, as part of restructuring in October, was moved out of the organization.
Ms. LeBlanc.
So, just to clarify then, so our understanding is that the Auditor General received a complaint that prompted the investigation. Was there ever a complaint that was received within the department, like an internal complaint from an employee to the executive director? Any kind of evidence of that kind of thing happening? And if so, who received the complaint?
Ms. Menchenton.
Not to me. So I can't.
You weren't there, right?
I'm sorry?
You weren't in there.
Ms. LeBlanc.
No.
Ms. Menchenton.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Everybody needs to just slow down, because if you interject with each other, then poor Hansard can't keep up. So, Ms. Menchenton. Yes.
really what I can speak to is how we're moving forward. And again, that's, we've put in place a brand new policy with new expectations, new standards, new commitments from staff, or that we require staff to sign that they've read and understand the new policy that's in place. Again, we have training that's moving forward, and we will be revisiting this every year.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you. So I guess I'm going to assume that you can't speak to why the conflict wasn't reported to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, but I will put that on the table. And also I wanted to ask, and I know the org chart suggests this, but I'd just like to clarify, who was the Deputy Minister at the time, and were they aware of the conflict?
Ms. Menchenton.
Talk me through this chart.
You'd have to go,
Mr. LaFleche.
you'd have to go to the timeline I handed out earlier. And when did this start, Ms. Menchenton? When was the first incident cited by the Auditor General?
First learned of something?
No, not learned of. The first Auditor General incident cited that was a potential or an appearance.
Ms. Menchenton.
I'm not, in June?
In 19. Okay, so if we go back to 19,
I'm sorry.
Mr.
we can
LaFleche.
see, well, sorry, if we go back to 19, we can see who the different CEOs and deputy ministers are. There's and there's associate deputies in there too, by the way. And so they would be the people who were there at the time. The Auditor General, I know she doesn't speak at this, but she did speak last week. She would be better placed to say, who might have said what to who. Maybe you want to talk, Ms. Menchenton, about where we've referred this Auditor General report, what we're doing with it, and why we're sort of like not talking a lot about this.
Thank you. Ms. LeBlanc has indicated she's fine and would like to proceed. Ms. LeBlanc.
So we've heard from you today that the department will commit to reporting. I mean, I'm assuming, I haven't read your new policy, but I'm assuming it says that you will, okay, no, actually I'm going to rephrase. Will the department commit to reporting all future conflict disclosures to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner?
Ms. Menchenton.
Yes.
Right. And
Ms. LeBlanc.
who in the policy or in the department will be responsible for that, contacting, picking up the phone and calling the Conflict of Interest Commissioner? Will it be the Deputy Minister, or will it be someone in the housing agency?
Ms. Menchenton.
So Brian Ward and I are executive directors, equally client services and operations, and we'll take responsibility for ensuring that these get reported.
Ms. LeBlanc.
And is there something in place where not only would you be contacting the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, but also your Deputy Minister and the Minister?
Ms. Menchenton.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah, there would be a process where, and our deputy right now is our interim board chair. So in both capacities, we would make sure that he was aware of any conflict of interest within the organization, and then disclose that to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner as appropriate. I also wanted to just mention one other thing. We've also referred this latest report to the Department of Justice for some advice on next steps with respect to whether or not it moves forward to police, and we're waiting for that advice.
Mr. LaFleche had his hand up. Mr. LaFleche?
This is just general process in government. So when we become aware, and it could be at my level, it could be executive director level, one of the questions we ask, that there could be a conflict. Someone discloses it, or we get a third-party report of it. We go to the person who might have the conflict, if not them that disclosed it, and we say, we have a talk with them about what it is, and usually if it's an obvious thing that should be referred to the conflict commissioner, it will be. But on the other hand, if someone complains about someone else, we do an interview and find out it's more of in-house chatter. We're not going to refer everything to the conflict, because I just see poor Mr. Justice Kennedy there. He doesn't want to get overloaded with a lot of noise, okay? So I refer things regularly.
For your consideration.
I refer things regularly in both departments, and I have in every department I've been to the conflict commissioner when there's any, like, if, for instance, we've actually asked him, we have some situations, obviously, in the housing where we give rental subsidies. So what if any of the staff are landlords? should they, now there's no more non-portable ones, but there are portable ones. Is that an issue? If someone with a portable subsidy moves in with one of our staff members, and if the staff happens to be a clerical person who's in the municipal affairs side, that's very different from someone who's working for Miss Elliott-Lopez, who runs that branch that gives out. So all of that is taken into an account, and if they're serious enough, we say we want to see a reference to Justice Kennedy. And I had one recently.
Mr. LaFleche?
Oh, sorry, I'm
Ms.
chewing up
LeBlanc
the question.
Yes, Ms.
It's too much
LeBlanc
theory.
has indicated that she is fine with your answer, so we'll move on. Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you. Yeah, so well, interestingly enough, this was one of my questions. So does the department right now know how many employees are currently landlords in receipt of public funds?
Ms. Menchenton?
They're filling out those forms now, disclosing their conflict of interest, so we'll know once we are in receipt of the forms that are coming back to us. Every employee is mandated to fill in that form and understand and have read the policy. And again, we're going out with training as well to help them understand too what some examples of that could look like. So we'll know after we get that material back, and then we can make a decision about whether or not it is indeed a conflict of interest as far as the work that they're doing.
Ms. LeBlanc?
Are there still contracts in place with the company that was involved with this conflict?
Ms. Menchenton?
Yes, there is. So we had an option with the individual company, the 5-star. We had an option to renew for a year, and we did in November before the result of the AG report. But as the AG commented, they said that there wasn't an issue with the company. So based on performance, we did renew a contract for a year.
Ms. LeBlanc?
And how much are the contracts worth, and for what amount of time? I'm assuming now it's just a year from November, but how much is the contract worth?
Ms. Menchenton?
Sorry. It's $996,000.
Ms. LeBlanc, you have just under 8 minutes.
Okay. So leaving that for a minute, one of the stated rationales of the reorganization of the housing and into the housing agency was to be able to standardize policies around the province, including policies around overhousing. This is a big issue in my constituency. And very concerning for many, many residents. So can you explain what work is underway on the overhousing policy? How many people have been moved to date, and how does the process work, or how will it be working for people?
Ms. Menchenton?
So we're rolling out the policy in a consistent way across the province, and I may ask my colleague, Ms. Spittal, to speak further to this policy development. But so, again, it's an inconsistent process. We're hoping to have it rolled out by the end of this month, actually, to everywhere. The idea, of course, is that we right-size our units and to accommodate more families on our wait list. We want to shift people out of homes that they've outgrown, let's say, where perhaps their children have moved on and they're now living in a house that has 3 rooms instead of 1. And so to do that shift, of course, we have to wait for a unit to become available. And we've organized ourselves a little bit, so we're trying to minimize impact to those that are on the wait list already. So for every third unit that comes up, we'll consider that as an overhousing option, and then have conversations, of course, with the tenant. They have a couple of options to refuse, and then we would work with them to try to shift them into a new unit. And I'll ask, if you don't mind, Ms. Spittal to speak to the policy development.
Ms. Spittal?
Thank you, and thank you for the question. Yes, so overhousing, currently, housing authorities, we currently have an overhousing policy as a part of our lease administration policies, and they do address overhousing, but as Ms. Menchenton said, it's not done consistently across the districts currently. So our first job was to standardize that approach, standardized communications to ensure everybody, regardless of where they live, receives the same type of notification, the same opportunities to work with staff to find a unit and match them up with a unit in their area that meets their current housing needs. We have support, they're called community relations officers in place across the province, and they're heavily involved in this process. So they'll be working to ensure that people have connections within their communities if they need support to offload some of their furniture. They're in a larger unit and they want to move to a smaller one. We have a training and orientation for all staff involved, from all the way up from the directors down to the frontline staff, to ensure, again, fair treatment, administratively fair process as per the Auditor General's report. And we will be starting with the most severe cases of overhouse, because it's not something you can do overnight. We can only work as fast as the number of vacancies that we have in our units. At the same time, we also have to address the wait lists, because of course it's also significant. We know that. So we have to balance the need to reduce the wait lists with the need to address overhousing. And so we also have a process in place through our new client and asset management software to ensure that that's fair, so that there's a ratio of how units are offered.
Okay.
4 minutes. Ms. LeBlanc.
In the reorganization of the agency and of the department, are there, at this point, are there plans for new public housing builds?
Deputy LaFleche, and we just have had a request from Hansard. If you, oddly enough, could speak a little louder or closer to your microphone. I don't know.
I've been waiting for years for that.
It is. I will just note that we have some percussion accompaniment, and so it would be helpful if all committee members and all witnesses could just speak up a little bit, because it is a little noisy in here.
I've been actually watching Ms. LeBlanc. Her questions are almost to the beat of the percussion in the background. She's a musical talent.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a great question. What's the go forward? So and you notice we don't have a CEO. We have an interim CEO, and there's a reason for that. And many people have phoned me and said, "I want to be the CEO. Let's." When is it coming? We did hire the Build Nova Scotia CEO a couple of weeks ago, you saw. So we don't have a CEO because we want to find out from government, from cabinet, where are we going? Are we building a lot of more new units? Are we partnering, as envisioned in the Affordable Housing Commission report, in the type of Toronto, Vancouver style P3/public developments like you have? Regent Park, etc. There's one YWCA in Toronto, etc. Are we doing those, or are we, going to sell off our units? What are we going to do? Or are we just going to keep them as they are and maintain them? So there's a big spectrum there of things you could do. I heard earlier from Mrs. LeBlanc, she would like one side of that spectrum. I get that.
I didn't say that.
Well, you pretty well did. So yeah. So that's great. You want one side, but you know what? We can actually offer the government choice of testing several sides of that spectrum, because Nova Scotia is different than Toronto, Halifax is different than Vancouver, et cetera, and we'd like to see what will work in our culture for our people, in our geographic circumstance, in our weather zone, et cetera, what will work. So Miss Elliott-Lopez and Miss Spittal and a couple of others are putting together a plan to present to cabinet where we will show and say, you want to try this, see how it goes, see if it'll work, and they'll be given an option maybe in one place. We probably need some new public housing. The minister is very taken by the issue of accessibility. We're struggling to achieve the accessibility targets through renovations. You can renovate an old unit, but fundamentally the structure doesn't take the renovations well. It's taking way too long. The doorways, the washrooms, it's just not good. It's very expensive, it's very slow, and it's blocking units from getting online, on stream. So we probably have to look to buildings which are accessible in a new way. Now, all new buildings are accessible, but the ones we have can't be. So that points to some component of probably new buildings we'll recommend. Don't know if it'll get approved. We'll recommend some sort of partnerships where we have a lot of land and things can be done with the private sector in dense urban areas. And we have, low-rise units, and we could go big city model. And then we may even recommend that some units are just not runnable by us. They're in a very rural area. There's very little interest from the residents to move into them, et cetera,
Order,
et cetera.
order. Time for NDP questioning has elapsed. We will now go to the Progressive Conservative Party caucus. Mr. Young?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad to see that the new Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency that was formed by our government has added conflict of interest language and disclosure requirements in all public tenders. However, I think it's concerning that for too long this was not the case. Why did we not see this change earlier under previous governments?
Ms. Menchenton?
I don't know that I can speak to that. I'm new to the organization, and so once it was brought to our attention, certainly, and that there was an issue raised by the Auditor General, that's when we looked at the language that we did have in place. Was the policy good enough? Did it address the gaps? We found that it didn't, and so that's why we have a new policy in place.
Mr. Young?
Mr. LaFleche had something.
Oh, Mr. LaFleche?
Yeah, I was going to say, it surprised me when I found out about this, because I've had several Crown Corps before, and I've always insisted they follow all government tendering. In fact, they've always been mad at me because I insist they follow government HR and communications and everything else. So this one was a bit of an oddity in that the way it was set up and the way it was governed was probably not a great governance structure. And I think, you know, many of the people who were the leaders in the timeline struggled with that. And they were run almost as 5 different authorities, fiefdoms. The authorities, the boards of the authorities, most people thought, as I did when I came, that they hired and fired the directors, that they did all the HR, the budgeting. I mean, they did none of that. You know, so they didn't really run the corporation, but people assumed they did, which meant that the directors ran them. And there was probably a lack of governance and understanding of all of that over the years. And if I went and asked many of these people who were involved before, they probably didn't know the extent to which these were run as, you know, when I came here at the community college in '94, we had a lot of campuses, principals of campuses. And I became a principal of 2 campuses. And one of the campuses, very surprised to see the principal was like a local czar and didn't really report to Halifax. In fact, cut the phone line and put on today's version of call blocker, you know, if Halifax dialed. And I found Housing Court to be something like that, but in 2020, you know, it was kind of weird. So we're beyond all that now. We've got a new corporation with a new act, so we're looking forward. And I think that's the important thing. So yes, there was a lot of problems over the years. Why it wasn't dealt with, it wasn't on government radar. Housing wasn't a big issue till recently. So it wasn't on the radar stream. And the department was moved around. So it was in giant departments like community services at one time. It was with municipal affairs, you know, and these departments had different issues and different lives. And the leaders of those departments could probably speak better than I could as to why not a lot was done. But this, and it was a federal thing we inherited. And so that always colored the image of it. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's more of a wimpy cultural answer than.
Mr. Young.
No, I appreciate your insight on that, for sure. I wonder if you can expand on what the new agency is doing to change its approach to the disclosure of conflicts of interest.
Ms. Menchenton?
So in addition to the policy, we've added language to our tenders to ensure that our bidders also will disclose whether they have a conflict of interest given the context that they're in. The other thing that we've also done is we're looking at scoring to talk about or to assess capacity and capability of the bidders that we have, and longer term. So the one recommendation that still is outstanding that we hope to have by June is a new procurement policy for the agency.
Mr. Young?
One more question. How are you ensuring consistent implementation and monitoring of the conflict of interest policy across the province within the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency?
Ms. Menchenton?
So again, we have now distributed the policy to all of our employees. We're compelling them to demonstrate that they have read and understood the policy. We're providing some training. So there will be a regular check-in. We have to determine the date that we're going to check in with folks, but it will be an annual check-in to make sure that nothing has changed in their circumstance, that they indeed update whether or not they have a new conflict of interest because their lives have changed or what have you. So it's really just about staying on top of that. We're filing all of the conflict of interest declarations from our employees with our Human Resources Department. So we do have evidence, or we do have something on file that notes that they have declared their conflict of interest. And again, we'll be revisiting that annually.
Mr. Yeo?
I'll pass it to my colleague, MLA Taggart.
Mr. Taggart?
Thank you, Chair. The Auditor General's report notes that there was no formal evaluation of the tenant services program piloted for 3 months in spring of 2020. However, management indicated it was a success based on feedback from property managers. Is feedback from property managers alone enough to determine if a project is successful? If not, what objectives or key performance indicators should have been used and will be used in the future?
Ms. Menchenton?
So I don't feel like the assessment was appropriate. I agree with you, and that's something we need to change going forward as well. There was a pilot program in place that, as you pointed out, as the Auditor General pointed out, just really didn't have the rigor around measurement and oversight, and that's something we will definitely be changing going forward.
Thank you. And sort of a little bit on the same theme, the Auditor General reports noted that one of the companies identified scored highest on many schedules of work. However, management felt that the company was not able to even deliver on some of these schedules where they scored the highest. Can you explain how this disconnect is possible? And can we be confident that the new scoring system will correctly determine what companies should receive contracts?
Ms. Menchenton?
So that's a gap that we are trying to address in addressing some of the recommendations provided to us by the Auditor General. So now we've added language to the tenders that, we've added to scoring that we will look at capacity as well as capability of any vendor that's bidding on our projects. So that wasn't there before, so that's one thing that we have changed going forward.
Mr. Taggart?
Yeah, it's probably inappropriate. You probably can't answer this. Do we know why they were refused? Was it legitimate, I guess, was a question I'd like to ask. Or was it used as a tool to hire their preferred bidder?
Ms. Menchenton?
My apologies. So I'll have to refer you back to the Auditor General report and how they assessed that and how they talked about it. I can only really speak to what we're doing to change things in the, in the days ahead. So again, just really, we have now remedied that situation, I hope, by putting in some language and scoring differently to document whether or not somebody has the capacity and capability to do the work that they've been given. The documentation is key.
Mr. Taggart?
Thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to find this all so intriguing and so much information, and so happy that changes are being made because it was difficult when we first got in office, and I can already see some of the changes now that are making a world of difference home. And so on the original AG report in 2022, the oversight management of government-owned public housing, can you talk about whether or not the department's on track to meet the timelines that you've set out?
Mr. LaFleche.
Right, so the June 22 report is what you're talking about. We actually passed you a handout that actually shows where we are, because initially when we had the meeting with you after the Auditor General submitted that report, you got sort of, this is what we're going to do. Now you have an update to today of where we are. So we can go through each item if you want. Would take a while, and I've been got in trouble for that before. So we won't do that. But you can go through each item. But if you have specific items you want to look at and ask us about, we're good, either here or later.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard?
So I guess that's a yes, you are on track, and I can go home and do some late reading, no problem. And then how will creating the Crown Corporation for Public Housing make a difference in terms of efficiency for public housing systems, as well as experience of the current tenants and the current applicants, the difference that it might make in their lives as well?
Ms. Spittal? Or, sorry, Spittal. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the question. Bringing all of the housing authorities under one roof and in one agency will increase efficiency because, of course, we can centralize policies. We have a central policy function now, and I'm acting director of the policy shop. We have finance and anything else that we need to do, we bring it, and we work with the staff and with our directors in the field to ensure that we're meeting their needs. Operational policy is kind of neat because it's all about collaboration. So while we're making sure that there's standard practice across the board, we're working with our frontline staff who know our clients best and can serve them best, and we can work together to understand the client side, we understand the staff side, we make administrative efficiencies, we engage tenants, and then we take all that information and we make our policy improvements, not only addressing what the Auditor General noted in her 22 report, but also addressing what was suggested but not necessarily marked as something we need to change. So basically, as our deputy said, we're changing it all. We're reviewing it all against best practice across the country and outside the country to ensure that we want to be the best, and that's what we're trying to achieve. So slowly but surely.
9 minutes, Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Thank you. So then, probably in here, but I am going to ask for on the record, if it's possible, can you give me the progress that's been made on the vacancy rate for the current public housing? Because I know that when I first came in, there was insane amount of units that were just sitting vacant. Can you speak a little bit about the progress that's been made with those?
Ms. Menchenton?
So we're putting different practices in place to try to accelerate our unit turnaround so that we can move people off our wait list and into our units much sooner. So right now we have I won't call it a pilot because I think it's something that we're actually just going to spread across the province at all of our districts. In Cape Breton, they've introduced a new unit turnaround supervisor. So it's a concentrated effort on this. I think it's our number one thing that we need to do, which is to get people again off our wait list and into our units as quickly as we can. They're already seeing some early success. To the point, in fact, where we'd like to layer this across every district in the province. So right now we have a standard for ourselves, which is a 60-day turnaround, and we're not meeting it all the time. So we're looking at our standards as well as, again, looking at opportunities and strategies to try to turn around those units much more quickly. So I can tell you that we are working on this one very hard. It's everybody's top priority right now in public housing.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
That's really good to hear because, you know, it's nothing worse than seeing public housing units vacant when there's such a wait list. So that's exciting. I think that a unit turnaround supervisor is exactly what everybody needs. And then one last quick question, I think. How will changing your leadership team make a difference on how the organization is run? Like some of the benefits of having a Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Authority. I know that you mentioned a few things, but can you talk a little bit more about why you think that this housing agency is the best path forward?
Ms. Menchenton?
So we're just collaborating. So I know that sounds like not exactly a new idea, but if you could appreciate that before we had 5 different entities operating in 5 different ways. They didn't talk to each other. So this is a brand new day for us. We're bringing people together. Everybody's just so fired up about wanting these changes for our clients. So we're talking a lot more. We have a lot more meetings where we're just trying to collaborate on different solutions and innovations around how we can make all of this better. So it's really just in sharing with each other. Our policy development is a huge part of that, setting new standards, new expectations, and applying them consistently across the province. So again, we don't have different treatment of from one end of the province to the other. So that's essentially the nutshell of it. We're working towards, having some of those policies in place. We have over 90 that we have to review and to shape and to modernize in some cases. So there's a lot of work ahead. But and you had talked earlier about our progress on the report from June 2022. So we're 25% complete. We are in fact on track to meet the targets that we've set for ourselves and that we've submitted to the Auditor General.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard, just over 5 minutes.
So now that you gave me that nice number of 25%, do you know roughly, can you predict roughly how long, how quickly, I guess, we're going to reach the 75, 100%?
Ms. Menchenton?
So we do have a timeline that is, you can see it online as part of our response to the Auditor General's report from June. So we have until 2025 to meet some. Some are going to take longer than others. We have some tech upgrades that we need to make. Those traditionally take a little longer. We also have some policy development. We're developing a policy framework for all of our policies. We're doing an operational review. We have strategic planning that we plan to do. So there's a number of big ticket items that will take a little bit longer, but all of it we're hoping to have finished by our target of 2025.
Ms. Sheehy-Richard?
Wonderful. I think that, I mean, everyone always says consistency is key. So consistency in these agencies and housing authority being one is going to be great. So I'm going to hand it off to Emily Smith for that.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. 4 minutes?
4 minutes.
Perfect. So in following up on some of the recent line of questioning, it seems to me this is a really, really good case study on how to respond to a problem within an organization. So last week we learned a lot in camera with the AG about the issues that were with housing, in particular with this conflict of interest and how it evolved and the timeline and all those things. And today it seems like we're learning about all of the actions that have been taken in response to that to make sure that doesn't happen in the future. What I'm curious about is how has the culture within the organization changed over the course of these changes and this report and the report from the summer. Deputy, perhaps you can take the lead on that one.
Deputy LaFleche?
Thank you. So culture is very important, and I don't want to cast any aspersions on any previous managers or leaders, but when you change the leadership, and we've changed everybody from director up, you change the culture. And what we tried to do was bring in culture from different organizations that are known for having a good culture, and now that's only at the management level. So that's where you got to start, because those are your leaders. So we've done that. The new district directors are all brought in. They've all got experience in doing these types of things. They've got this unique experience. I'll touch back to Ms. Melissa, member MLA Sheehy-Richard's question. They've got experience in Crown Corps and in the core of government, and some of them in the private sector. And that's important, because in a Crown Corp, the reason you have one is to have more flexibility to do stuff, but you still have to have all the safeguards of government. But they can't be as totally restrictive. Otherwise, you get things done at a different speed than you would in government. And, we know what that's like. Plus, you have to deal with individual clients, and you have to react quickly. You can't go to cabinet for every little decision. So you need that flexibility, but you need that governance structure. So we brought in people who are used to working in those environments, in the different environments, with different skills and different backgrounds. So now the question is, are the people that we've inherited or brought into the Corp from all the different 5 housing authorities, are they going to be able to adjust to the culture? Well, that's our leadership, which has to imbue that culture in them and get them on board. So to some extent, the success of the organization is going to be us turning that around. And as you know, in any change, and I was there when the community college did this, became 1 out of 15 campuses, one organization. Some people, they take the lifeboat and go elsewhere, right? Because they're not going to make it in the new culture, or they've got not that much time left. Others love the new culture and are great contributors. So we're going to have a combination of everything out there, and we'll do our best to make it work. So I don't have a better answer than that. This is how we've done it before. We did it with AgriPoint, which became Perennia. We did it with Nova Scotia Lands. It's going to be done now with Build Nova Scotia, Invest Nova Scotia. These are the things, we've done before, and we kind of know how to do them. Sometimes they take longer, sometimes they take shorter, but I think we're on track to doing that here.
Mr. Smith, you have just under 1 minute.
I'd love to hear from Ms. Menchenton or Ms. Elliott-Lopez on the same question on the culture, what you folks have observed, maybe a little closer to the employees than the deputy minister might be.
Ms. Menchenton?
Well, for me, it's about engaging our staff in the world that we want to be in. We all have high expectations about what this is all going to look like going forward, and we expect that people will embrace those high expectations and meet those standards that we're setting. So it does come down to setting expectations, having measurements in place and accountabilities where we're checking in. So things that hadn't happened regularly in the past, even performance management, that kind of thing, we want to bring some rigor back to all of that. And as we move forward over the coming year or coming years, there's a lot of structure that we're putting in place and expectations. But culture is really important, and we want people to be excited about the changes that are happening.
Time has elapsed for the PC questioning. Sorry, and I should have explained to you beforehand, when the time elapses, I just call order and we move on. So apologies to everybody. I usually do that before we start a committee. So we will now move on to Liberal questioning once again. Each caucus will have 8 minutes. So Ms. Nicol.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and you do it very kindly. Thank you. And thank you for all the questions that have been asked by thus far. And I know we hear it very often, and it's nice to be with a company that realizes that we are in a housing crisis. And when it comes to public housing, I was just wondering, how will we address the ever-evident, obvious pressure by the homeless people that are in our province? How will the public housing look at addressing that? And we hear a lot of announcements made towards affordability and money being put aside for that. Other provinces in Atlantic Canada are doing it. We know there's commitments and agreements with certain developers for affordable housing. So I'm trying to, in this restructuring, see who is responsible for being accountable for the money that's already been allocated and for how it's going to address homelessness and the affordability for seniors.
Deputy LaFleche.
Thank you. Well, that's a complex question. Yeah, Deputy Teweel, Tracy Teweel, and myself are responsible at the administrative level. Obviously, our ministers are responsible for policy. She's the lead on homelessness, but we're the provisioner, if you will, of the physical structure. She has the great job because a lot of the clients who are homeless need wraparound supports. They need a lot of different things than just a building to house them. So she's in charge of all those other things. She takes the lead. And we help her by providing the physical structure in many different ways. Ms. Elliott-Lopez, do you want to talk about some of the ways we do that and what we've done recently?
Ms. Elliott-Lopez?
Thank you. And so one of our flagship programs that we introduced this year is the Community Housing Acquisition Program. And we've actually supported a number of the DCS organizations to purchase facilities or rooming houses, small buildings to renovate and turn into rooming houses or into supportive environments, supportive care facilities. And so we've supported a number of organizations in that way. And we also just recently announced $2 million in modular housing. And so we're working closely with the Department of Community Services to find ways and the places most in need of those modular units to enable additional shelters for those who are at risk of homelessness or are homeless. And one other way I would say too, we've actually just recently, and I believe Deputy Teweel spoke to this recently, that we're changing our rent supplement program for those on income assistance to allow more funding to flow to those individuals. And so again, we're serving those at risk of homelessness through rent supplements as well.
Ms. Nicol.
Thank you. And so in reading the progress update, there has been constant restructuring and change. And in your response, I thank you for that. Those things were already being done continually. But the immediate pressure that we see right now with the hundreds of people that are homeless, I'm not seeing an immediate reaction to that as to how you're going to address it in your response. So I just wondered, because I know you're the capital and you will be the build, and community services does their wraparound services. So how much money is being allocated to actually build public housing?
Deputy LaFleche?
New build.
Well, as I articulated earlier, we are bringing a plan forward to government, and they will then decide. But in terms of homelessness, you may have seen HRM just got 11 million from the federal government. CBRM, I think, got 5 or 6. And that's for a rapid housing initiative. So a lot of that is being done, and that's what's building the homelessness placements that you see now, the physical infrastructure, as well as the places that Vicki Elliott-Lopez just mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of work going on. Things are tight in the construction industry, and when you haven't built housing 2 years ago, someone made a decision not to build 2 years ago, well, then today, 2 years later, we don't have anything. So
Ms. Nicol?
that's a big part of our problem. So we're starting today.
So to that point, a quick question, since the federal money is the 11 million, is the province required to match that 11 million?
No.
Mr. LaFleche?
We're not required to match. Do you want to speak to that?
Ms. Elliott-Lopez?
Yes, we're not required to cost match, but we do
2.5
contribute. And so in the last couple of rounds, for example, between us and the Department of Community Services, we contributed about $16 million, and that will support ongoing operations. The federal government contributes toward capital.
Ms. Nicol?
And like I said, in the governance, this has been ongoing, I believe. It said it's been going on for the past 3 years, and you've been looking at that. So it's nice to be here and, and hearing the progress that's been made and where you're going. Did you mention that there is a CEO to be announced for the new Crown Corporation, and where is that?
Mr. Deputy LaFleche?
No, I mentioned it. I'm the interim CEO. Mark Peck was until he got his new job on Monday. He was for 11 weeks. And I'm the interim CEO. The corporation just started really on December 1st. And we will be looking for a new CEO within the next 6 months.
Ms. Nicol?
He wears many hats, so he must all have them on speed dial. So therefore, when it comes to, going forward, the auditor's results for the remaining 4 public housing authorities, you mentioned that they will be made public. And I just wondered if there was one way to provide oversight to this committee by coming and providing those audit results on a continual basis in the future.
Ms. Menchenton?
We can certainly explore that. I don't know what that would look like, but we could certainly explore that.
Ms. Nicol?
It's a new day and a new way of doing things. And so to the point of growing public confidence, I think, any audit committees that I've been on, those things that are audits are regularly done are provided to the public servants that actually produce that information and are asked for that to be accountable.
Mr. Deputy LaFleche?
I just want to clear up any confusion. So those audits, because we've had the audit of the Auditor General, and earlier question was asked whether there could be anything else out there. Beyond conflict of interest is only one issue we might want to audit. There's also other things that could have happened in a nefarious way over the years. So we asked internal audit to investigate certain things and to go and investigate. Internal audit is internal to government. So that's why you're getting a little hesitation there, because if internal audit finds stuff, then we will bring it to the Auditor General, and that would naturally come to you. If they don't find anything, there won't be anything to bring.
Order. Time for Liberal questioning has elapsed, and now we move on to the NDP and Ms. Coombs.
Thank you. I just want to do some clarifying here. When just doing a brief scan of this policy, I saw the words, it says, of staff may inform the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And so I'm wondering if that is indeed the language, and also why does it not say shall?
Ms. Menchenton?
Well, I believe the deputy spoke to this earlier as well. It depends on the circumstance. Not every rental property, if a person owns a rental property, is necessarily a conflict. So we'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis and whether or not to escalate it to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. So there's a dependency, I think, on what is actually disclosed as the conflict and whether or not that should be elevated beyond, to the commissioner. I think that's the language may, so it's really a decision at the department level to determine whether or not someone should escalate beyond.
Ms. Coombs?
Thank you. I do think that can get very hairy of people making those decisions rather than having the commissioner himself make that determination. And so, because there is a difference between may. May is you can, and shall is it's a must. It is imperative. And just so I'm clear, one is that part that you just mentioned where where something's been brought to your attention and you're weighing it, is that in the policy? And so that's one question. My other question to that is, isn't that the commissioner's job is to determine whether something is actually a conflict of interest or not? Not staff, not somebody else, but an individual whose job is to determine and give a actual decision on what is indeed a conflict of interest and what is not.
Ms. Menchenton? Oh, Deputy LaFleche.
I was going to say, you're probably addressing the question at the wrong people. And I know the Conflict of Interest Commissioner cannot talk, but they should really talk to the scope of their work. We recommend anything we think is pertinent to the Conflict Commissioner, and we will continue to do so.
Ms. Coombs?
Okay. Well, I would also suggest that your office, as well as everyone else, talk to the commissioner about what his job is and what things what types of things that you're maybe coming across that should actually come across his desk to determine whether it's conflict of interest. It's just that this is why we're here. This is why this whole issue is why we are here. People either avoiding the policies and proper oversight either not happening or was not within policy.
4 minutes.
So thank you. So I'm just going to move on from that, and I want to talk about housing itself. And so I've noticed in my office that people are spending a longer on the priority access list before they are placed into housing. And just, can you tell us what the average wait time is for priority?
Ms. Menchenton?
So the average wait time, I believe, is 140 days. I might look to Ms. Spittal to confirm that for priority access.
Priority access?
Ms. Spittal?
Excuse me. Thank you very much. So we have different wait times. So for on our wait lists, the average wait time is, well, it depends on the Regional Housing Authority. We have, right, sorry. The average wait time in Nova Scotia is 2.32 years. And the average wait time for priority access is around 1.5 years.
Ms. Coombs?
Thank you. You actually answered two of my questions in that answer. And I'm just wondering, has anything gone down since the reorganizing? I mean, I know it's only been early, but I'm just wondering, have we seen any changes as of yet?
Ms. Menchenton?
We have, so we've improved our application turnaround time. It's gone down 75% from where it was. And we've also reduced our backlog from 34% to 3.3%. So that's a success. We are working right now on unit turnaround and slowly reducing the amount of time that our units are offline. And again, I alluded to this earlier, that's a huge priority for us. That's one of the biggest things that we can affect, and in order to move people off our wait list, and that's something that we are concentrating on. The other things that we've done in a positive way and that we're seeing some movement on is around our tenant engagement. So we have focus groups right now going on across the province. We have 14 or 15 with more to come to talk to our tenants about how they want to be communicated with and what their primary issues are, what their priorities are for us, so that we can build some processes and systems around that.
Ms. Coombs, you have just over 1 minute.
Thank you. I was about to ask you that. And so I just want to finish up here and really say I'm still trying to figure out how we got here. Because to me, when it comes to procurement, when it comes to finances, all of that should have been at the deputy minister and ministerial levels, including the finance. And I know that the AG has recommended that as an approach. And so I hope we don't ever see these types of issues again. And I hope we tighten up our conflict of interest policy. And I do, again, think that we need to look at that wording of may and shall and maybe talk to the conflict of interest commissioner about that language and what he would recommend for that policy.
Mr. LaFleche.
Hopefully, Deputy Thomas is watching, and she will take note of the comments and talk to the Conflict of Interest Commissioner, read the may and shall, and read the mandate.
Order. The time for NDP questioning has elapsed. We will now move on to the PC Caucus. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great conversation, great discussion. I'm pretty confident in the actions that have been taken as a result of the AG report, that we're in good hands moving forward, and we have a good plan moving forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So I have a couple of questions on supply, because we know that supply is really at the crux of the housing crisis. In the last year we had record numbers of new Nova Scotians, and so we need to figure out a way to build more houses faster, more units faster. So I'm wondering, Deputy, if you can speak to a little bit to what we're doing to speed up the design, the planning, the approvals, the regulatory process. Give us an idea of what's happening to make more houses faster.
Deputy LaFleche.
Okay, great question. Thank you. As you know, we brought in the Halifax Planning Task Force, sometimes called the panel, just over a year ago, and we've just made some changes there. We got a very incompetent person off the panel and replaced him with a very competent person, and as well put another person on who's going to be the executive director in charge of implementing the Deloitte report, which was a big report that the panel did that looked at HRM's practices and came up with many recommendations that HRM agreed with. So we've jointly going together to implement that. So that panel is an important component of speeding up housing. They've approved 9 special planning areas, more to come. We work very closely, at least Vicki and I did, with and Jeff Garber, one of the employees there, with the companies who have the special planning areas to make sure all roadblocks are removed. Roadblocks sometimes are provincial or federal. They're not all HRM. So you got to remove roadblocks, and they happen every month, and we're removing them. So we're trying to get housing built quickly. But supply is the problem. We have the Turner Drake study out there now. We had a just recent little briefing from them. They're hitting the same numbers of lack of supply in HRM as you've heard, around 20,000. And, we have an annual gap, too. So push. Every city in North America is doing this now. We've got to, and it's uncomfortable. And I get that it's uncomfortable for a lot of people who live in neighborhoods where things are going now higher rise. It's also, I've been out in the South Shore, on the Eastern Shore recently, and, and had a couple of visits there. Councillor Hensby, very good guy. I'm probably not allowed to say that. I was out with him, and he related how he got voted down at council on a particular move to make things go faster, and we support him in going faster. Eastern Shore, okay, I'm good?
You're good. 5 minutes, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I've got two more. So, so another piece to the supply issue is making sure that the existing residences that we have are maintained and stay in good order so that they can continue to be used. Deputy, you and I have spoken about this numerous times in conjunction with the little survey that we did on the Eastern Shore with some of the vacant derelict. This one goes a bit further. This is the Residential Rehabilitation Assistance Program. I'm wondering if someone can talk about the future of that and how many units we expect to be impacted as we move forward. I think there was additional funding in the fall of last year that was added for that program. Ms. Elliott-Lopez?
Ms. Elliott-Lopez.
Thank you. So our rental wrap program is very popular with landlords across the province, and we actually did add $2.5 million to that program. We expect a few hundred units to be maintained with that. But I will add, in addition to that, when we think about existing stock, we also have our community program, which we just added $12.5 million to. And that's going to help. So you probably heard the announcement, $7.5 million was provided to the Nova Scotia Housing Trust to repair half of the units that they recently acquired. They acquired about 300 units. And so that's going to help them maintain the affordability by us providing that funding. And then we have our home repair programs. And that's a significant program as well. And we just recently added $5.3 million to that program. And that's going to help us increase the number of households assisted from 1,800 to 2,300 this fiscal year. And so when we think about, I mean, our best supply is our existing stock. So we want to do our best to maintain that existing stock, and we're doing that through several means.
Mr. Smith.
I believe Deputy would
Deputy
like to.
Yeah, just a quick one. The government just promised a lot of money before Christmas for heat pump upgrades to people on lower incomes. That's a very key and potent. Yeah.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you. And my final question is going to discuss a little bit about the down payment assistance program, which isn't as conventional as you would think in increasing and helping the supply. But if folks otherwise can't get a down payment to build or get a construction mortgage, there's a chance that this could help them, which would add supply. So I'm wondering, Ms. Elliott-Lopez, can you talk a little bit about the down payment assistance program and how that's being used to be helpful?
Ms. Elliott-Lopez.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, we've made changes twice this fiscal year to our down payment assistance program in response to a lot of the feedback that we heard through correspondence and as well through our realtor partners. And so the first big significant change that we made was we increased the threshold. So households or anybody, and I'm going to refer to HRM and East and West Hants, because that's where we're seeing the biggest need right now, and that's the one top of mind. But it's $140,000 household rate, and $500,000. And so when we think about that, I mean, initially it was under $300,000 for the purchase of a home, and now we've increased that to $500,000, so that we're helping more Nova Scotians access their first home. And what we provide a 5% interest-free toward the purchase of the first home. And in addition to that, we also revised our definition of first-time home buyer. And so that was significant as well, because we were hearing a lot from individuals from various communities and through various constituencies that single moms, as a great example, divorced, didn't have access to funding for a down payment, but really wanted to buy a home for herself and her children. And so now our first-time home buyer definition has changed to accommodate that. And so if you're separated or divorced, then you have access to the 5% down interest-free down payment as well. So really excited about those changes. We know we're going to help many more people this fiscal year due to that.
Mr. Smith, you have 45 seconds left.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just say a thank you on behalf of the committee for joining us today. Again, it was a really, really good, interesting case study on a problem that was identified, analysis done on what we can do to make it so it doesn't occur in the future. And I'm confident that the leadership we have in place will change the culture and make sure that these issues don't arise again. Thank you.
And now, Deputy LaFleche, if you have any closing remarks you want to make?
Yes. I'll just be quick. And I'm going to relate them to public housing in general, not today's specific topic. So the government is very focused on this. It's a priority, and I fully admit my predecessors and ministerial predecessors didn't benefit from a government that was focused on housing, and that's why a lot of these things have happened. But going forward, we've got to make a lot of moves with this new corporation and in housing in general, in the programs that Ms. Elliott-Lopez runs for general housing, to advance build in Nova Scotia. MLA Smith correctly brought up the issue of supply. Supply demand is very much out of balance right now. We've got to go rapidly, and in doing that, we can't be one end of the spectrum, you know, go all private, or the other end go all public. We've got to try different things in different areas at different times, whatever we can do, whatever works, and we've got to go quickly. So we're going to step on toes. We're going to make people uncomfortable in some areas, and that's just going to happen. Change is always difficult. This province is changing rapidly due to population growth, and it's the type of population. It's new immigrants from different places who are coming in, all across the province, in the rural areas and in the urban areas, and we're changing rapidly, and that's difficult for a lot of people. So we will make mistakes, and we will do things some people don't like, but the government is firm on getting things done and making Nova Scotia successful. A great part of that success is having the housing that Nova Scotians need. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy LaFleche. And now, committee will move on to committee business. So our witnesses, I'd like to thank you for coming in today. Deputy LaFleche, please go walk that knee off. And
yeah, I made it through.
Yes, you made it through. Thank you so much. Thank you. Because we have a large volume of persons in the room, I'm just going to suggest a 2-minute recess until 10:40. Order, order. I now call the meeting back to order. So I will note, for the record, that 2 email polls were conducted in advance of today's meeting. One to proceed with the meeting in the absence of Deputy LaFleche if that were required, which was not agreed to, and one to allow the Honourable McGuire to participate virtually, which was also not agreed to, so just for the record. And then I have to roll through some committee decisions. January 18th, 2023, the committee agreed to deal with committee business at last week's in-camera meeting as decisions needed to be made for today's meeting. As the decisions were made in camera, I have to ask for the committee's agreement to make these decisions part of the public record.
Oh, Brian.
And so we're meeting now. Thank you. Is there agreement? All right, I'm going to now read the motions from the January 18th meeting. First motion was that Mark Peck be added to the witness list, and that if Mr. Peck can't make it, that we postpone the meeting until Mr. Peck can make it. That was moved by MLA McGuire. The motion was defeated. Motion that in addition to the witnesses who are proposed by Deputy Minister LaFleche, that we add Mark Peck and that he have a virtual option in the event he's unable to attend. We have a discussion as a committee about moving forward. That was moved by Kent Smith, MLA Smith, sorry, and the motion was carried. The motion, a further motion was to meet with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner virtually about this topic in advance in preparation for what turned out to be this week's meeting, and that was moved by MLA LeBlanc, and the motion was carried, and we did in fact meet with the Conflict of Interest Commissioner. So we also have a motion from Mr. McGuire that was put forward at the December 14th meeting, which has been left on the floor, and he has asked that that be dealt with when he's here, and he's not able to be here today, so we will, with the agreement of the committee, we will do that at a future time. Ms. LeBlanc?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a comment. That's not about Mr. McGuire.
Can we just, I just want to get the virtual, there's one more thing, and then we will absolutely go to yours.
Apologize.
The next item is virtual participation by the Auditor General, pre-hearing briefings. The AG and her staff may not be able to attend some of the upcoming pre-hearing briefings in person, and the AG would like for herself and her staff to be able to participate virtually when they are unable to appear in person, and the committee would need to agree with that. So I'm just opening the floor for any discussion, if there's any discussion. I'm seeing a lot of nods that people are okay with this. I'm not sure that we need a motion for that. Because they're in-camera meetings, so it's just that she pre-briefs us before all of her reports. So, Ms. Nicol?
I just wondered why the Auditor General wants to do it virtually.
The Auditor General is here.
I wasn't
My understanding
here.
is she's not able to attend. I don't like to inquire if they're.
This is for the briefing.
Yes, this is for the briefing. Would the Auditor General like to speak?
And
AG.
thank you. Just to clarify, it's for the extra meetings. It's not the briefings related to our reports. It's for, like, for example, next week there's an in-camera briefing scheduled before the Farm and Fish Loan Boards appear. I'm scheduled to be in Toronto. There's a meeting of the Auditor Generals, which was set up months ago. So what I would propose is I will have staff here present, but I will be virtual to do the in-camera discussion.
So we're, Ms. Nicol?
So to clarify, it's just for this one particular meeting while you're in Toronto that you want to appear virtually?
There's one more date in March.
AG? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't, Ms. Adair?
There's one more in-camera meeting scheduled in March that I will be away. Yeah.
All right, so having, right, I think we all agree that this is virtual participation is fine, and I don't think we need a motion. Okay, so, very well. We do, And we do have some correspondence, but I think we have correspondence from the Department of Health and Wellness, Nova Scotia Health, follow-up info from November 23rd meeting, Department of Labor, Skills and Immigration, information requested for the November 30th meeting, Nova Scotia Health, follow-up information requested from the October 5th meeting, and also information from Finance and Treasury Board that was sent out to us. If there's any further discussion from this correspondence. Okay, now we will move on to Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, I just wanted to state for the record that because, and I didn't get a chance to sort of follow up in my questioning period time with the Deputy LaFleche, but I just want to state for the record that I did sort of misspeak when I spoke at the beginning of my time. I do think that public funds going into not-for-profit housing is a very good use of public money. So I don't believe in the full spectrum. I mean, I do believe in the spectrum of housing. Want to get that on the record. That being said, Madam Chair, so there was much discussion about, you know, Mark Peck being at the meeting, and then today we found out that he couldn't be at the meeting. I feel like some of the questions that I asked were not able to be answered. I even like sort of pointed out that when Ms. Menchenton was answering, you know, that she wasn't in her position at the time. So I would like to ask you as chair to take the questions that I have that would have been for Mark Peck and ask him in writing to respond to the committee. So basically taking questions from the committee, and it doesn't have to just be my questions, and ask him to respond back to the committee in a letter. Can you do that?
Is there,
I mean,
has it come up before? I think if it's the will of the committee that we can absolutely do that. Certainly, we did make clear that we wanted Mr. Peck to be here, and that we had, I see you, Mr. Taggart, we wanted him to be here to answer questions. He wasn't able to be here. I think we dealt with that. I'm just thinking back here that we could have delayed this meeting if in fact we thought that he should be here. I think people really wanted to go forward and see if they could be answered anyway. We certainly had a cast of thousands here. So the committee has previously indicated their desire to hear from Mr. Peck. And so MLA LeBlanc has proposed that we could write him a letter with those questions in it, and then we would be able to get his answers to those. And that seems reasonable to me. We didn't postpone the meeting, but we will in fact hear from Mr. Peck. So I have Mr. Taggart, then Mr. Smith. Mr. Taggart?
Well, I think I kind of agree with that in this one instance because it was kind of like a last minute thing. But I have to tell you, I'm very, very concerned, like, you know, so we have a system here where everybody gets equal time, everybody gets asked, equal amount of questions and that sort of thing. And I know, and so we're kind of going to set a precedent here, and I can just envision the next one, and it'll be, a whole list of questions. So if we're going to do that, I think we have to have it tied down pretty tight. That's my thoughts on it.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to make sure that we can all have a look at the questions before they get sent to Mr. Peck and that they're relevant for the topic at hand.
I think they would be questions that Ms. LeBlanc had asked and didn't feel were answered. And I think we'll have to work with MLA LeBlanc to make sure that I'm not assuming I know which ones you didn't feel got answered properly or anything like that. So, Ms. LeBlanc?
Yeah, totally. So again, I just want to be clear that this is not just about my questions, but I feel that there were questions that weren't able to be answered that I hope would have been able been able to be answered by Mr. Peck. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Taggart, but I also do know that I thought, and I'd love to hear Mr. Hebb's thought on this, that the chair does have the purview to follow up with witnesses to get answers that weren't collected. And I think we did that with Ms. Oldfield at one point. So this feels like a really good use of this committee, in fact, so that we're making sure we're getting all of the answers. But yes, I'm happy to.
So perhaps before I send the letter out, I'll just circulate it so that people can see it, to ensure that I'm accurately reflecting the questions that didn't get answered. So I have Mr. Young and then Ms. Barkhouse.
Just thinking on MLA Taggart's point, about setting precedents. We have a certain amount of time here with witnesses. I'm not comfortable that we're going to now, if witnesses can't be available, now we have more time to send questions off. I'm just not really comfortable in setting a new precedent and changing with this.
Thank you, Ms. Barkhouse.
Thank you. Can I just call for like a 2-minute recess, just so we can discuss this?
Certainly.
It's not a motion.
Yeah, it's not a motion. I have done this before. I have gone back to witnesses. I see you, Ms. Coombs. I have gone back to witnesses that have been unable to answer questions. Certainly, Mr. Peck was unable to answer our questions today. Ms. Coombs.
Thank you. So I just want to, because I understand the concern, but to me, this is based on when we ask questions here, the whole idea of public accounts is for all of us to get the answers from those that appear before us. If we do not receive adequate answers to those questions, I truly believe that our job is to go back and get those answers to those questions that, one, our constituents, I know I want to hear the answers to, our constituents want to hear those answers, all Nova Scotians want to hear those answers and have those answers available to them. And so I don't see this as any precedent setting or going outside of what this committee is supposed to do. I see this as part of the job, and that is to continuously hold departments and ourselves accountable to the people of Nova Scotia. And this is one of the avenues we have because Mark Peck couldn't show up, but everybody else did. And he has these answers that we're seeking. And I'm sure you yourselves have questions, as well as the Liberals had questions that weren't answered. And I just think that this is the actual part of our job, is making sure that everyone in every department is held accountable by the Public Accounts Committee. So
Thank you,
I just want to put that out there.
Thank you. The PC Caucus has requested a 2-minute huddle. Sorry. What are we calling it? Recess. Thank you very much. So we'll give them 2 minutes, and then we'll just finish up our meeting. Okay. So 2:56. Order. Committee is now back in session. And so we'll just do what we've done in the past, which is I will craft that letter in consultation, I think, with Ms. LeBlanc, because I can't know which ones you didn't feel. There were some ones where I think you expressed it, but I want to make sure I get that accurately. And we have certainly, I can see him. We can certainly get that done up. And this is not creating precedent because we've done it before. So, Mr. Young?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we're in the past when we would try to get additional information, what we would do is send a letter to the department. As Mr. Peck's no longer with the department right now, like, you know, so if we're looking for clarity on your questions, the letter should go to the department.
Thank you for that. Ms. LeBlanc?
Sorry, I have my hand up for another topic.
Okay, well, I do believe the last time I wrote a letter, it was to an individual, so I'll take that under advisement. Ms. LeBlanc.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I also wanted to ask if, so I love all of this information that was presented to us, but I would have loved it in advance. And so I'm wondering if we, when we're inviting witnesses to committee, that we can ask for any kind of handouts that they're going to be giving in advance.
I was exactly thinking of the same thing, because that would have been, all of this, which is great information, would have been really helpful to have last week or any time. I recognize that they're probably still working on things, but it would be very helpful. And I also, and at least, right? And also, you know, when there's multiple handouts, you know, having them go around the room, it wastes time, and you can't actually ask any questions about them because you're in the middle of it. So I don't know what that says.
We do.
So if in fact it could be, or it could be provided to the library, which is in fact, you know, doing up the research packages if they're ready in advance. So perhaps when we will ask the clerk that if they are going to have any handouts, that they be provided to the committee in advance. So with that, the next meeting is February 1st, 2023 in camera. The witness will be the Auditor General, and it's a pre-hearing briefing with Nova Scotia Fisheries and Aquaculture Loan Board and Nova Scotia Farm Loan Board, the most recent annual report, financial statements, and business plan. Mr. Taggart.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I misunderstood the original intent there. So the questions that you may send to whoever, they're the questions that you asked previously. They're not new questions. Am I right?
That's right.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Taggart. Is there any further business? No. Okay. I now adjourn the meeting.